Welcome to our Mahoney Matters news show. I'm editor Chris Pugh. I've got Guy Vogrin with me. Guy, how's it going?
Good morning, Chris, or afternoon, I guess. I'm a
Yes.
little bit behind here. It's been a kind of a slow Monday. Our court was wrapped up really early, so I'm just in checking X and the social media most
Yes,
of the day.
definitely. Definitely. Well, again, always interesting things happen around the Mahoney Valley. I kind of want to talk about some college protest kind of things. Youngstown State hasn't had the protests that we've seen at Ohio State or other parts of the country.
Right.
There's been a lot of protests about what's happening in the Middle East. Some people are upset that not more is being done against Israel. As we know, it's all political. I know, especially down in Ohio State, some of the state officials kind of started to, like Frank LaRose said, no, we're always going to defend Israel and everything. Well, I think it's a little bit more broader of an issue than just are we supporting Israel or Palestine or anything. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. But it was interesting. Youngstown State, they had another protest against Bill Johnson. The group has been, yeah, the group has been critical about the selection of Bill Johnson. They said they would still kind of make their feelings known. They kind of had a Friday protest, kind of like they said, hey, it's going to be a review of what we
And in
think.
advance of the graduation ceremony, a little bit.
Right, right. So kind of a noble weekend. I know Saturday and Sunday were the graduation ceremonies for Youngstown State. What kind of led to a couple of questioning um, glances among people up in the area was that the day before, so Wednesday they announced this Friday protest, and on Thursday the administration answered and said, "Look, there's some things you can and can't do on campus. Open flame, you can't, attach signs to buildings or street signs or anything else like that." I think there were a lot of people on Youngstown State that were rightfully concerned, going, wait a minute, why are we making laws just because we have a protest planned Friday? We spoke with Youngstown State spokespeople. They were saying, hey, they didn't deny that it was in response to this protest against Bill Johnson, but they they talked about free speech. It's important to start to make rules about what's appropriate, what's not. How can you protest? How can't you? And in my vein, it kind of had something to do with some of the other protests. Probably could have been done a little bit better. But Youngstown State talked about we need to have better rules for it. Guy, here was the interesting thing. Some of the things they were saying was, hey, be careful about if you project your voice. So to me, that would be if you have a bullhorn or a microphone or something
Right.
like that. Well, how the heck do you
How can you
navigate
get a
that?
protest organized just by, without the voices being amplified? Yeah, I think some of these rules that they were talking about. I mean, traditionally YSU had their protest around the Rock in front of Kilcawley Center, the student union,
Right.
and that's just a very small area. I think these rules sprung out of the Vietnam War protests of the late '60s, early '70s, and many of the of course, Youngstown State was more of a commuter university, than Kent State or Bowling Green or Miami, the state schools. And back in the '70s, most people just got out of the campus area by 3, 4 o'clock. So that
Well,
there wasn't people hanging around to protest. Now it may be a little different, but um, I still don't. The Bill Johnson, is that really something that students can get up and about? I mean, I know some of your more liberal students are still probably having a problem with the conservative. congressman becoming their president, but I don't see a vast crowd of students being really that up in the air. I think it's
Well,
a small minority.
well, and from the coverage up there wasn't a huge number of people that were
Right,
there.
right.
I, but well, there's a couple broader issues at play, in my opinion. Here, I think I will give Youngstown State credit. I think they were responding to what's been happening when you look at Ohio State, Columbia, and the other places like that.
The bigger colleges are getting these Hamas protests.
Right. And you said something right before we started recording saying, well, maybe Youngstown State isn't the same type of protest may not be available, or there may not be as present at Youngstown
Right.
State
You're
as
not going to see that ultra liberal student
well,
being coming to Youngstown.
or even maybe there isn't as much of that thought here. I don't know. I really don't know. I guess the thing that kind of bugs me in general is look, you can protest. Obviously, if you protest, like I talked to somebody down in Columbus one day, and they were talking. We were talking about the protests that were happening around the George Floyd thing and some of the other COVID things
Uh-huh.
that were happening in Columbus. And she made the point saying, "Look, protest is meant to cause inconvenience." And if you protest, you understand you might be breaking the law or something like that. So I totally get that. I think people have the right to do that if they feel strongly a certain way. I think the timing of it was kind of weird because why do you issue that rule the day after a group says, hey, we're going to cause a protest on campus?
Right, right.
And the protests kind of dealt with Ed O'Neill, the Youngstown native, married with children guy, modern family guy. He said, "Hey, I'm going to give my, honorary diploma I got from Youngstown State to this group, and they can burn it." And the group really wanted to burn it, which is fine. So now you're saying, "Oh, no open burn," and you're saying that
Right.
right afterwards. I
You're
wish
kind of like taunting these protesters, like to try to stir things up.
or is it just a bad look that Youngstown State thinks they have? I mean, it's in front of the president's house, and you might sit there and say, "Hey, you've had time. I don't know if we want to see this here on campus." You know what I mean? It was a big weekend. I don't know. I don't think there was a lot of people just hanging around campus during graduation
No.
weekend, but you might sit there and say, "I I don't want to have that." Think of like your church. Say your church had a big Easter weekend, and somebody didn't like the fact that the church had a certain event, so they wanted to raise a stink about it. Well, you don't want a stink to be raised every Easter weekend, and maybe that's how Youngstown State looked at it and said, this is our graduation weekend. We don't necessarily need to have a bunch of people out yelling and screaming about stuff.
Right.
I
And
don't know.
that could have been their thought that there's going to be a lot of visitors on campus, and they kind of
Yeah.
wanted to tamp this down, and make Bill at least look good for his first graduation ceremony.
Well, and here's the other thing too. I think there was a legitimate thought, not just for Youngstown State, but other colleges around America, is to say, what happens if there is a Hamas style protest in our town? And you could sit there and
Yeah.
say, well, maybe there's not as much of a chance of that happening at Youngstown State to other schools.
But at least
But,
they're trying to be proactive and
right. And I
kind of
really
head it
think
off at the pass.
I think their timing, they didn't put a lot of thought into the timing. I will take away points for that. But I think they legitimately were trying to figure that type of stuff out. Here's the beef I have, okay? And I was talking to a reporter, Kelsey, about this. Okay, when you project your voice, okay, think about what if there was a celebration on campus? Say the football team won a title or
Right.
whatever the case might be.
A
Well,
rally, I mean, if they're
yeah,
going to the playoffs.
yeah, or say, I mean, the night Bin Laden died or something like that.
Right.
There might be a celebration on campus, where
Right.
else the case might be. It's kind of weird to set a rule like that Because if you set a rule like that, then what do you say? Okay, you could get in trouble if you're doing it in a
Right.
protesting matter, or whatever else the case might be. It's almost like a rule that you can selectively use and
Right.
selectively not.
And in our high school, our the rally for our biggest rival football game, there was always a bonfire the night before the game.
Right. Well, and here's the other thing too. I was in the office. So I wasn't physically able to get the rally, but I watched the rally and everything else. Looked maybe it was hard to tell because you couldn't see everyone there. Maybe 30 people there, which wasn't
Okay,
a bad number. Well, but because the other thing I'm
classes are
thinking
done.
about.
It was finals week, right? Right, and probably the last final was done by Wednesday. And I would think any underclassman was gone, and any senior preparing for graduation is out getting something to eat with their parents.
Right, but I guess the question I have is, I've been on Youngstown State several times over the past couple months covering these protests. I talked to the security people there, and it's not a knock on their security people at all. Their security people are kind of watching it from a safe distance. I'd never cover a rally where there's any threat of danger or violence to anybody involved. But when security is watching something like that, they're not right in the middle of it. They're looking at from a distance. When you look at that policy, if you look at the letter of the law, hey, they burned his diploma. You know what I mean? They yelled, they screamed, and everything. What can security do? I mean, Youngstown State has a police department. Okay,
Right.
they enforce the law. Well, so if say there was a fight at a protest or something, yeah, you could arrest somebody, or if maybe somebody was speeding through campus, you could arrest somebody. But they don't have that power. And if guy, you're the protester and you're yelling something through a bullhorn, what can security do? They could probably tell you to knock it off or something,
Right.
but they're
Youngstown
not
doesn't
going to
have a
arrest
noise
you.
ordinance. Right.
Yeah, yeah. So is this something where does the rule mean anything? And I don't think Youngstown State was looking to prosecute people protesting the Bill Johnson thing. I think they were starting to address the concern of what if there was like Hamas
Right,
protests
right.
there.
They were trying to be proactive, but like I said, the Hamas protests were going to bigger cities, bigger universities. I saw last week that the frat boys in North Carolina, and then there was another big anti or a counter demonstration at the University of Mississippi that
But
it looked like
but I
frat
guess when
boys were really getting the best of the Hamas protesters.
yeah, but I guess my concern, like bottom line for the Youngstown State people, is what does that policy even mean?
Right.
Like, like I mean, in the media, we'd be raising a stink if we said, "Hey, if you protest, you're going to jail. Don't pass go, don't collect $200." But on the other hand, if you have a thing that just says, "Oh, you shouldn't do these things," or something could happen. I mean, they were talking about, hey, maybe there's a suspension or something else like that that could be involved.
Yeah.
Well, can you do that? And if you can't do that, do you open up legal questions? I don't know. And I guess I mean let's look at this from a couple different levels. And maybe I'm a little bit grouchy today, but I'm going to be critical of a variety of people here. First of all, from a Youngstown State thing, okay, I know they took a lot of hits. They took a lot of bad publicity around the time that Bill Johnson was hired. This is a couple months later. Okay. If I was Youngstown State and if I was being proactive, have that protest is fine. Why doesn't Bill Johnson go out there
Right.
and talk to them?
He still is kind of. I mean, we saw Bill that first week, but is he mixing it up with like he was as a congressman with the rank and file, so to speak?
Well, here's another question.
We talked about maybe his PR people trying to get his reputation going at school. I haven't seen any evidence of that.
Okay, well, here's the other question I have. Okay, Mahoney Marriage has trolls. We're not going to get into who they are, but Mahoney Marriage has trolls. I'm sure where you work at, you have trolls. You have people who
Oh
don't like
yeah, we have ours.
you. why not? And again, this goes against what I just said, but why not? Like at Mahoney Matters, we just ignore them because it doesn't make sense to engage. You just ignore them. You do your business and as best as you know how to do. I'm sure you guys probably do the same thing.
Yeah, we are.
So for Youngstown, say, okay, maybe Bill Johnson shouldn't go out and talk to the guys or anything. Why can't Youngstown say just ignore them? And to the point where they say, okay, go protest, do whatever you want to do. And if they do something that's illegal or moral, yeah, I mean, go arrest them or whatever else. But why are you addressing stuff when maybe it's better just to let it go? And again, I'm not pro YSU or pro protesters or anything. I just when Youngstown say puts out policy, I think they just look a little silly. Why not
Well,
just
could
like
it be that Mr. Johnson is a little bit thin-skinned and is kind of that's his reaction to this?
I don't know if there's a thin skinness as much. I think there's probably been some concern in terms of monies in general. I don't know if Youngstown State is losing a lot, but we've talked about this when he took
I'm
over.
sure Mr. O'Neill was a donor.
Right. Well, I'm sure there's a concern saying, how do we not lose too many people? I mean,
Right.
yeah, I don't know they've lost his money. I'm sure they understand and know that, but maybe there's a concern saying, hey, let's don't take any more PR shots we don't have to take. But I guess what I'm saying is when you put out a policy like that, aren't you opening yourself more for a PR shot than if you just let it go?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it got your attention as an editor in the media to kind of talk about it. And if they hadn't done anything, we probably wouldn't have talked about it.
And I'll and guy, you know how I feel about stuff. I'll let our listeners in on how I feel about things. If it was okay, I'll put it this way. I got the press release from the organizers on Wednesday night. My first question was, hey, is Ed O'Neill going to be at the ceremony? No, he's not. We have his diploma. We're going to burn it. Okay, no problem. After that, I was probably more just like, hey, send me a picture if you wanted to send it. But when I got in Thursday and I saw that policy, my ears like went up a ton. You know what I mean?
And it
So,
was a counter news release then?
well,
Did they send you the policy or it was just displayed?
we were notified about the policy that went out there.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
And what I guess what I'm saying is my ears perked up. Yeah, if there's a protest, we will take notice. We're going to mention it. It's something that happened in the city. But it became a lot bigger deal when we were notified about how
Right.
this impacted the
Why
policy.
she responded.
Right. And I just, yeah, I find the whole thing rather confusing, to be honest with you. And I guess the thought would be is, have they addressed that? I mean,
Right. And this goes in line with my theory that Bill Johnson needs a good PR man, a public information guy to kind of handle these things and smooth it through because this was definitely handled wrong on the part of the administration.
well, whenever there's a conflict, if it's between coworkers or administration and student group, whatever else the case might be, I, I mean, what does Youngstown State gain by reaching out? I mean, Bill Johnson, his PR attitude was, hey, if you got a problem, you can find my phone number, give me a call, I'll try to meet up with you, we'll try to talk.
Yeah.
I don't know if that conversation happened. I mean, nothing's been said to us in the media. If it's had, what do you do? I mean, yeah, you can make the argument saying, well, maybe it's fair if you talk to the group and see if there's some middle ground you can find. Well, what if they tried to? What if the middle ground's like, no, we just don't like you. We're not going to move forward with this, or whatever the case may be. I mean,
We
you're
don't like
kind
your
of
politics.
well, yeah. Well, and look, that's it. I mean, if you're not a Republican, if you don't like some of the ideas Republicans have had, you're not going to agree to it. So you got to come to a point where, and let me be critical of the student group too, where you sit there and say, okay, you may not like it. You can oppose your displeasure. They definitely did share their displeasure. So what do? I
Right.
mean, you could wait around for 6 months, maybe you hope the president had some major scandal or major, thing where you said, "Oh my goodness, he can't lead or anything." Well, let's
I mean, he obviously he's still leading, but he
yeah,
does have a PR problem. And like you, I think you're hinting at this that maybe he needs to get on a personal level with these guys to show them that he's not a monster,
yeah, but
and that I mean that personal touch can still shine through politics. I mean, we saw that back in the '80s with Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan going for drinks and having a decent conversation. Can't Bill do that with whoever is upset about his politics?
okay. Well, right now there's a student group that's upset.
Right,
There's an alumni group that's upset. I'll be honest. If I'm Bill Johnson, I'll be a little bit more concerned about the alumni group and the student group. In
right.
essence, the student group, I mean, they've just said, "Hey, we don't like you. Okay, you don't like me. Whatever." I mean, how is the student group behaving differently than like a troll on the internet? Like, somebody who goes on
Right.
and says, "Oh, I just don't like what Mahoney Marriage is
And
doing," or "I
and
don't
Bill
like."
probably could take care of that by having some better selections at the food court.
Yeah, but if you don't like the president, you don't like the president. The president could
Right,
get up and
right.
say,
I
free
know.
ESPN in all dorms or whatever. Yeah, I mean, there's you get to the point where there's not much you can say or you can do.
But that's
And,
part of the personal touch that you can reach out and
well,
say, hey, this guy's a human being. He deserves to be liked.
right, but yeah, I think if Bill Johnson was on the pod, he'd probably say, "Hey, look, I've done this, I've done that."
Yeah, and I'm sure in
Something
our
that's out
in our
there.
interview with him when he first took office, he tried
Yeah,
to intimate that he's a good person, and I thought he would be showing this more and
I
having media opportunities to do it.
well, yeah, I kind of wonder is if you're opposed to something, if you're opposed to Bill Johnson, whatever else the case might be, maybe there comes a time where you sit there and say, okay, if I'm a Youngstown State administration, I say, look, okay, people were opposed to it. He became president. We're moving on. I mean, I'm sure that's what the administration would say if they're sitting here.
Right.
So if
I'm
you're
sure
the
that's what his advisors were saying, especially those that are worried about the alumni donations.
right,
Let's just kind of
if you're
let's
the
let's
group,
take
then,
shelter and hope the storm passes.
yeah. So if I'm part of a student group, and again, I'm not saying blindly support Bill Johnson. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying you get to the point where you sit there and say, okay, what's our next step forward? Do we sit there and say, yeah, we're going to continue to speak out because we don't like his politics or the way he views certain things or whatever? Or do you sit there and say, I mean, is there something that we get more attention? Yeah, when they have protests, we go cover them in the media. But I guess what I'm saying is, what's the next best path forward? I don't know. Are we just going to protest every 6 months? And
Well, we're going to be on the back burner for a couple months, and when school starts up again in fall semester in what August, late August, we'll see what the tact will be.
yeah, I'm kind of wondering if the next step might be it's just saying, how do we have something that will have our voices be heard? Is it more representation on a student senate or something, or is it, whatever the case might be? I used to work in Galion, Ohio, and at the time there was a huge fight between the mayor and a group of citizens that they used to be friendly with the mayor and everything, and they got mad. They wanted like seats on council and all this other stuff. It's like, well, wait a minute, you have to run for council first. You can't just demand representation.
Right.
You have to find a seat at the table. And I guess what I'm saying is, if we're talking about any type of organization, be it Youngstown State, the Trumbull County Prosecutor's Office, Mahoney Matters, whatever else the case might be, if you're opposed to something, you got to find what's that next step, what's that next best path forward. Yeah, we've made it clear we're not happy about it. We made it clear we're still going to protest and everything, but are you going to just be irritant, or are you going to say, hey, here's something we could do to have our way move forward? And that's where I'm a little bit unclear on what's happening next with that. To be honest.
Yeah,
Um,
and we'll have to see.
and
Uh,
I'll sit there and say too. Again, from some of the things that Bill Johnson's had, I don't know. I mean, I went to a gun violence summit where he made some comments about in favor of families supporting kids and everything. And I mean, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to break down
right.
every comment he makes to
Well,
say
I'll tell
if
you,
it's
the
in
next
favor or not?
flashpoint could be that with the presidential election, getting underway
Right.
and the campaign, it'll be. I know back in 2016, Bernie Sanders came to YSU. It'll be interesting to see what kind of personalities will be coming to campaign for the various candidates.
Yeah,
And
definitely. And I would sit there and say, I know I like to go off on things. I would say the same thing about the college protest. Yeah, sometimes these protests start in colleges. So if you're concerned about something that's happening, so when you look nationally, again, nationally, the concern is more of, the Middle East argument. And,
right.
there's people upset thinking that Israel's getting too much credit for stuff. And again, you have
And
to,
and I think what the real underlying thing is that a lot of people are unhappy about the United States' undying support for Israel.
well, and I sit here and try to figure out, yeah, I mean, when you protest, you raise a stink, you make life inconvenient, and you sit there and say that. But are college campuses the best place to do that? I mean, I guess you can make
Traditionally, it has been in the
well,
last since World War II, I would say. Yeah,
and you can make the argument, okay, they're publicly funded and stuff like that. But is that uh, so? If I'm protesting this on, say, Ohio State, okay, I need to win that protest, but still, I've got to make my case to legislators or whatever else the case might be. I mean,
correct. And the administration, yes.
right? But
And we're hearing, like very much in the Vietnam War era protests, that these protests on campus are being stimulated by outside agitators, not connected to any of the campuses. There's just political action groups coming in and
okay,
stirring
well,
up the students. Where at
but
least we know in the Bill Johnson case, uh, it's the alumni that reacted and kind of stirred up the students in that issue.
well, I mean, I guess wherever these groups are coming from,
Hmm.
I guess my thought is if you want to see action or whatever you're protesting or whatever you're upset about, how do you look at the problem head on? You know what I mean? And
Right.
I just don't know if colleges. Yeah, I mean that's a place where you can protest something, but is that where you're going to see the most of the results at? Is President Biden going to be like, "Wow, that protest at Columbus was really crazy. I'm
Right.
going to change my mind on how I view the
Yeah.
Middle East."
How I view Israel. Yeah. My Middle East policy. Obviously, it eventually worked in the Vietnam War because, people died in these protests and public opinion
All right.
eventually swung because of the progress of the war itself.
Yeah,
We
but
were
but look
losing,
at
it was a stalemate.
Vietnam. I wasn't alive during that time, but go protest at college campus because you're saying, look, there's not many people here because everyone's getting their butt drafted into
Right,
Vietnam.
right. At the time, yeah. And
Yeah,
at the time that they got rid of the draft for a while, I was the benefactor of that.
right.
Uh, didn't even have to register
Well,
by the
well,
time
see,
my time rolled around.
well, I think during COVID time. I mean, okay, in Columbus, they protested at the Ohio State House because the thought was, okay, we're not happy at COVID policy, so let's protest the Ohio State House to get people to change their mind. Or George Floyd. I mean, even though George Floyd was killed in Minnesota, people who wanted to see change, at least you're at the Ohio State House where you felt that you could see some change. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, again, I don't think the policy directly comes from the college campus. So, I mean, it'll be interesting. I just, I'd like, again, I guess my bottom line is I'd love to see people being able to protest. I'm just trying to figure out if I'm students are protesting, what's my end game? What I want to see come out of this? If I'm protesting Bill Johnson or Middle Eastern policy, wherever the case might be. And at the same level, if I'm Youngstown State or Ohio State, what am I trying to see come out of it? And if in the Youngstown case situation, it's like, hey, this is kind of embarrassing to have people yelling, put more thought into the policy. I mean, don't sit there and say, don't amplify your voices or don't burn anything. Sit there and try to find a policy that makes the most sense for everybody. You know what I mean? And definitely designate times and places
And
where you can.
don't try to drown out their First Amendment right, because that's basically what that is trying to do.
Well, and if we really want to bottom line it, it's a public place. It's a public
Right.
institution. Your tax dollars are going to pay for it. And again, and I've heard this said, and I think there's a lot of merit to what's being said. You know, people sit there and say, like, I've gotten this complaint. People say, why are you covering the protests when there's 30 people there and there's X number of people on campus? I know the protesters will sit there and say, well, we've got petitions signed from a lot of different alumni. Well, uh, you still need to kind of, hey, let's just define what we're looking for when we either protest or we're trying to stop protests. And let's be smart about how we convey those thoughts. And I'll be honest. I know we've been going at this for about 45
Half
minutes
an
or so,
hour.
half an hour. You know, well,
Okay.
that's us, man. We can never say anything quickly. I I don't think either side's putting a lot of thought into what they're doing, and it makes
Right.
both sides look bad. To be
Yeah,
honest.
there's no plan or rhyme or reason for it other than just reacting to each other.
Yeah. Um. eh, And I, we mentioned this before, but for Youngstown State, maybe the best path forward is from a public relations side. It's just saying, look, here's what Bill Johnson did since he started. Here's, we met
Yeah,
with different groups. We're saying
he's
that.
creating a record for himself,
Yeah.
and he really hasn't had any major gaffes that I can see. And the protesters, just because they don't like his politics, I'm saying now.
Well, and if you really want to look at it too, and we've said this even during the beginning when like he was up for the race. Okay, yeah, I mean he plays an important part in the college in terms of raising money, raising awareness of the college. But if he doesn't do his job, it just hurts the college. Youngstown's not
Right.
coming down or anything. It's just more of, what has he done so far? And look,
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see the enrollment figures too coming in the fall.
this I've seen what he's done so far. A couple of public events I've seen him at, and some of the statements I've heard he's making. I think he's really trying to push for Youngstown to have a prominent, the college to have a prominent place in the community, a way of helping, and it's a definite way of approaching it. And, like,
Pretty much
of course,
keeping the policy of Jim Tressel, who
yeah.
really was a conservative guy too.
Well, you look the other day. Mike DeWine came up. They're forming a new region for Jobs Ohio, so Mahoney Valley will get
Right.
their own region. And, Bill Johnson was there, and I
Right.
think Bill was trying to promote the fact of saying, "Hey, I think Youngstown State could help us get some more
Right. Be
jobs."
a good big partner in,
Right.
opening up a manufacturing and helping the chamber there.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's where it comes down to. And again, I'm not giving Bill Johnson necessarily a free pass or anything, but I guess what I'm saying is if you're against his move, take a close look at what he does and everything. And if it's something that you're afraid of, like saying, "Oh, he's promoting conservative, policies or whatever," okay, use public records requests, do what you can to get as much information you can. If you have that, make your case. I haven't seen
Right.
that yet.
No.
He's only been president for a couple months, so I guess what I'm saying is protest. I'm all for you protesting, but I need to hear what the point is coming out of
Right.
it because I'm getting a little tired just saying, okay, there's people who are upset. Yeah, it's newsworthy. We'll cover it, but if nothing
Like they're
happens,
going to take their money and run if you don't get Johnson out of there. Like that's not going to happen.
or they'll try to find money in another place. Yeah, wildly different situation, but it was interesting. I covered a youth gun violence summit where they had religious leaders, some politicians, some local police in to talk about answers and what they could do. And near the end of the time, one of the leaders got up. He made a good point. He said, "We could talk about this all we want, but what are we going to do to actually change stuff or fix stuff? That's what we need to do."
Right.
So
Right.
I don't know. It's very
Exactly.
interesting. We're trying to clean up around Mahoning Valley.
Right. It's
Some might think,
springtime.
yeah,
Spring
some might
cleaning
think we
time,
need.
and if you have your, especially in Trumbull County residents, if you have your old refrigerators or other appliances and old TV, there is a place on the northwest side of Warren that will accept that. It's the Trumbull Geauga uh, solid waste district on Enterprise Drive near the bypass in 422 there. They've expanded their hours and they will be accepting a whole bunch of stuff. So uh, there's a story on Mahoning Matters about that, and want you to check that out.
Yeah, and take advantage of some of the things that are available. I don't remember off the top of my head who these people are, but there's some free shredding that's available. I know at
Yeah.
certain times for the valley and everything, and do that. I mean, it
And if
helps.
you have like fluids, automotive
Yeah.
fluids hanging around, they will get rid of them for you on a certain day. And if you have questions, there's a phone number with that story to ask.
Well, and take advantage of the times where you can dispose of stuff you need to dispose of. We had a week or two ago. We had a series of stories about prescription, uh, drop
Right,
off day.
drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah, the prescriptions they're old and they you want to get them out of the hands of maybe of kids uh, to get rid of them. There was a place that was drop offs. I know the DEA has twice a year sponsor these events at
Yep.
many places in the valley.
Yeah, take advantage of them when you see them. So, all right. Well, guys, thanks so much, man. It's always good to talk with you about
It's
Mahone
good.
Valley
It
News,
went fast. Whenever we talk about Bill Johnson, it seems like time gets away from us.
and we look at
Maybe
the
we'll
time
need
and
to have
say,
him out on the show again.
"Yeah, I do." A couple things came up about related things. We got to talk off air a little bit. So,
Okay.
for Guy, this is Chris. Thanks for checking us out. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye now.